You're being lied to about Iran. Everything the media tells you about this country is a smokescreen. The absolute truth about Iran has been hidden for over 3,000 years in the pages of the Bible. And what you're about to discover will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about the conflicts in the Middle East. Pay close attention. Iran isn't just another country in the news. Iran is a prophetic figure, a country whose destiny was written by God from the beginning of time. And the most shocking thing, the Bible not only reveals Iran's origins, but also shows exactly how and when this country will fulfill its final role in human history. Did you know that Iran appears in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation? But here's the detail no one tells you. Iran isn't mentioned by its modern name. It appears as Persia. And the biblical narrative about Persia doesn't stop at its origins. It extends to the end, revealing Iran's role in one of the most terrifying prophecies in the book of Revelation, the War of Gog and Magog, a coalition that will rise against Israel in the last days. But before Iran became a prophetic enemy, Persia was something else entirely. It was God's chosen empire, an empire used to liberate his people, rebuild his temple, and fulfill Daniel's prophecies. Isn't that fascinating? How can a nation go from being a liberator to a destroyer? From being blessed to being cursed? What does this mean for us today? What hidden truths about Iran's role in God's plan are waiting to be uncovered? If you want to understand what's really happening in the world, comment 777 right now. Let's embark on this incredible journey together. Now we'll uncover Iran's hidden role in God's great plan. Believe me, you won't want to miss it. Iran's biblical destiny, the truth about Iran written in the Bible. It all begins at the dawn of a new world, in the book of Genesis. After the great flood, when the earth was cleansed of all corruption, God extended a new beginning to humanity through the only surviving family, Noah and his 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. These 3 men were more than mere survivors. They became the patriarchs of nations, bearers of destiny, whose lineages would shape the future of the world. Chapter 10 of Genesis describes this extraordinary panorama. It is not just a list of names, it is the Bible's first world map, a divine genealogy tracing the formation of peoples, languages, regions, and kingdoms. In verse 1 of Genesis 10, it is written, "This is the account of the families of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, from whom all the peoples of the earth descended. From these descendants emerged the nations we know today." Among these names, hidden in the sacred text, are 2 figures who would one day give rise to what we call Persia today, a nation that would rise, fall, and rise again to play a decisive role in both ancient power struggles and future prophecy. The first name is Madai, son of Japheth. From Madai descended the Medes, mountain warriors who settled in the rugged northern territory of what is now Iran. Isolated between snow-capped peaks and vast valleys, Madai's descendants developed resilience. They were independent clans, a fierce tribal people, known for their unwavering character and solid organizational structures. These were not city builders or temple architects. They were defenders of the highlands, hardened and united by ties of blood. Madai is recognized as the father of the ancient northern heartland of Iran. Then comes the second name, Elam, son of Shem. His lineage gave rise to the Elamites, who settled in the fertile and lush lands of southwestern Iran, near the Persian Gulf. Unlike the Medes, the Elamites developed early urban centers and exerted political influence. They controlled important trade routes and fertile agricultural plains, making them a formidable force in the ancient Near East. But the Elamites weren't just neighbors to God's early people. They were aggressors. For in Genesis 14, the stage is set for the first major international conflict recorded in the Bible. A war that would not only test alliances, but also reveal something much deeper: how heaven responds when its chosen ones are threatened. At that time, 4 eastern kings, including Chedorlaomer, king of Elam, formed an alliance and advanced westward, penetrating the land of Canaan. They sacked cities, enslaved entire populations, and among the captives they took was a worthy man, Lot, nephew of Abraham, the man of God. Do you see what just happened? The descendants of Shem and Japheth, The early ancestors of Iran didn't just rise to power. They became the first to challenge God's covenant family. Elam, backed by other Eastern kings, dared to invade the land Abraham had walked. And the conflict wasn't just over territory. It was a confrontation with the promise God had placed in Abraham's life. What did Abraham do then? Did he chicken out? Did he negotiate? No. This was a turning point. With only 318 trained men, his own servants, he launched a daring night raid. Outnumbered, outgunned, and outgunned, Abraham attacked the invading kings, shattered their forces, rescued Lot, and returned with the freed captives and the plunder. How could such a small group defeat a coalition of Eastern empires? It wasn't by military brilliance. It wasn't by superior force. It was by the favor of God. This wasn't just any battle. It was a spiritual message written in blood and fire. No Eastern power, no ancient empire, no emerging kingdom can defeat one who walks in covenant with God. This wasn't just a victory. It was a declaration across generations. Heaven confirms what it commands, and even today, the echoes of that first war linger. Could it be that what we are seeing now between Israel and Iran is not just a repetition of history, but a new spiritual cycle? That the ancient lands of Elam and Madai, once defiant before God's chosen ones, are once again assuming a prophetic position? What if the hostility wasn't born in recent decades, but was sown long ago in the pages of Genesis? It now grows, matures, and awakens for its final confrontation. For while Elam once marched with an army, and Abraham once stood alone in faith, this same spiritual war is far from over. And the question remains, who is still under covenant today? And when the next battle comes, whom will heaven defend? But the people of Elam did not fade away. They were not erased from history, nor did their legacy crumble with the fall of a single city. No, they endured. They saw empires rise and fall like tides. Centuries passed. Kings lived and died. Tribes scattered and reunited. And while the world focused on the thrones of Egypt and Babylon, the forgotten children of Elam, once defeated by Abraham himself, rose. Their bloodlines flowed silently through the eastern lands of Mesopotamia, where two ancient peoples, the Elamites and the Medes, shared a rugged and fertile terrain. Elam settled on the fertile southern plains, where rivers fueled life and prosperity. The Medes, hardened by the northern mountains, were shaped by wind and stone. Theirs was a brutal region, but it forged warriors with a resilience few could match. Two nations, two spirits, one destiny, silently building in the shadows. Around them, empires rose and fell. The world changed, but from the ashes of darkness, something new began to take shape. First, scattered clans, then tribal confederations, then kingdoms, and finally, an empire, Persia. Don't be fooled by your pagan beliefs or your foreign gods. These nations, Elam, Media, Persia, were never beyond the reach of God's plan. Even though they worshipped idols, God still spoke their names. Even though they didn't yet know him, he had already written their roles in the script of redemption. Through the voices of his prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, God declared something astonishing. Not just one prophecy, but two. And both would be fulfilled with such terrifying precision that they would resonate in history like thunder long after the events. The first prophecy, spoken by Isaiah and repeated by Jeremiah, foretold that Elam and Media would rise not as enemies of Israel, but as the tools God would use to punish Babylon. Babylon, the empire that had crushed Jerusalem, destroyed the temple, and dragged God's people into exile, would not go unpunished. God had already chosen the hand that would bring about its downfall, and that hand belonged to the united peoples of ancient Iran. Have you ever stopped to think how God can use even those outside the covenant to accomplish his will? How could a nation known for its idolatry become a hammer in the hands of the Holy One? But the second prophecy was even more astonishing. God would not stop at judgment. He would use Persia not only to punish, but to deliver. Through the prophet Isaiah, God appointed his chosen liberator more than 150 years before man was even born. A king, a foreigner, a man who did not know God, but whom God knew intimately. Isaiah 45:1 declares, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whom I hold by the right hand to subdue nations before him." Anointed. That word reserved for prophets, priests, and kings of Israel, placed on the head of a pagan ruler. Why? Because Cyrus would become the agent of freedom. He would decree the return of the exiles, fund the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, and be written into the sacred history of a people who were not his own. Before Cyrus was even born, God began laying the groundwork. In the 8th century BC, a man named Deiotarus, king of the Medes, began uniting the scattered tribes of Elam and Madai. From this union emerged Iran's first imperial capital, Ecbatana, a name forgotten by most, but engraved in prophecy. This was the beginning of something sacred hidden behind something political. His grandson, Kiexares, took this foundation and transformed it. He didn't just lead, he reformed. He reformed the army into a formidable force, so formidable that it overthrew Nineveh, capital of the dreaded Assyrian Empire, whose cruelty toward Israel was unmatched. And with Nineveh's fall, one of Israel's greatest oppressors collapsed under the weight of prophecy. Do you see? The prophecy was unfolding step by step. God wasn't just watching history, he was writing it. Persia wasn't an accident, it was an instrument. God was raising up a people from the hills and valleys of Elam and Media, people who had once warred against his chosen ones and who would now become his instrument. Not for glory or empire, but for judgment and redemption. Because when God speaks, time listens. And when God appoints, even a pagan king, no force in heaven or hell can undo it. So, if God could call a man like Cyrus by name even before his mother conceived him, if he could use Elam and Media, long forgotten by men, as the key to Israel's restoration, how much more is he orchestrating even now? How many nations, peoples, and insignificant moments are being forged for a destiny we cannot yet see? For the God who raised Persia from the dust is still at work, and the script he began has yet to be completed. Yet even as Persia grew in power, extending its influence across continents and shaping the world stage, its destiny was already written long before its armies rose to power. Long before its kings sat on thrones of gold, God had already revealed its future through the whispers of prophetic dreams, and the first to see it with divine clarity was not a king or a general, but a young Hebrew prisoner. Daniel, a teenage exile, a captive, torn from his homeland and thrown into the very heart of the empire that had destroyed everything he had ever known. It began with a catastrophe. The Babylonian army, under the ruthless leadership of King Nebuchadnezzar, invaded Jerusalem. The city's mighty walls were smashed. The temple, the house of the living God, was looted and left in ruins. Thousands were taken prisoner and forced across the desert to foreign lands. Among them was a young man named Daniel, whose life had just been shattered. Can you imagine what that moment was like? Being torn from your family, your culture, your worship, your identity. Everything familiar was left behind in smoldering ruins. Yet in that darkness, God chose you, not by power or lineage, but by faithfulness. In the glittering halls of Babylon, surrounded by corruption, idolatry, and pagan riches, Daniel refused to bow down. While others feasted at the king's table and drank the wine of empire, Daniel remained pure. And because of this unwavering loyalty, God granted him something few have received, a divine window into the future. Visions not only of his generation, but also of the kingdom that would come after. And at the very heart of the empire that had devastated Jerusalem, Daniel began to see something astonishing, that Babylon would not last, that another empire would arise, forged by two arms of silver, an empire that would one day be key to the destiny of his people, the Persian Empire. And this journey into the future began with a dream. While Daniel was faithfully serving in the court of King Nebuchadnezzar, the most powerful man on earth was suddenly seized by terror. One night, he had a dream. It was haunting. vivid, and impossible to forget. An imposing statue appeared, made of various metals, a head of gold, a chest of silver, thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of clay. But Nebuchadnezzar, troubled and proud, issued an unparalleled challenge. Don't just interpret my dream. Tell me what I dreamed without my saying a word. No magician, sorcerer, or wise man in all of Babylon could do that. Fear spread like wildfire. Death awaited them all. But then God's servant stepped forward. Young Daniel, strengthened not by intellect but by revelation, was brought before the king. He sought the Lord in prayer, and heaven opened. That night the mystery was revealed. Can you imagine? This exiled teenager stood before the throne of the world's greatest tyrant, calm, fearless, resplendent with the light of divine truth. And with humility and authority, Daniel said, "No one can do what you ask, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." Then, with precision and power, he described the king's dream in minute detail, without even hearing it. And what followed was one of the most extraordinary revelations in human history. Daniel declared, "You, O king, are the head of gold. Babylon, the splendor of kingdoms, the first in the prophetic chronology. But after you another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours, symbolized by the chest and arms of silver. This silver represented not one nation, but two. Two arms, two peoples, the Medes and the Persians. Different, but united. United in strategy, divided in power. And of these two, the Persian arm would rise stronger, dominating the other and assuming leadership. Have you ever considered that God foretold Persia's future even before it became a world power? That while Babylon was still proud, heaven was already preparing its replacement? The statue wasn't just art. It was a chronology, a divine map, a sequence of kingdoms stretching from Daniel's captivity to the end of time. And at that moment, Daniel made it clear, Babylon will fall, and the throne will pass away. Not by accident, nor by ambition, but by divine design. The empire that had overthrown Jerusalem would be overthrown, and the kingdom of silver, Persia, would rise by divine order. This prophecy wasn't just for kings and scholars. It was a message for all generations. God is the one who builds empires. God is the one who tears them down. And no nation, no matter how powerful, is outside his plan. So now, as we look at Iran's growing influence, do we remember that its rise was foretold in a dream more than 2,500 years ago? That its power then and now has been seen, measured, and placed within the tapestry of prophecy? And if God revealed Persia's rise before it happened, what has he already shown us about its fall? Because the vision didn't end with silver, and Daniel's dreams haven't ended. Far from his homeland, surrounded by the towering idols and gilded halls of Babylon, a young man named Daniel waited. Though a foreigner in exile, his spirit remained anchored in God's promises. He had seen visions, glimpsed kings yet to rise, empires yet to fall, and now those visions were stirring, ready to burst upon the world like a pent-up storm. Could this really be happening in your life? Would the God who had spoken through prophets and dreams now fulfill his word by the emergence of an unexpected king? Long before this moment, the prophet Isaiah had spoken a name no one could have imagined would matter: Cyrus. A yet-to-be-born Persian king would be used by God as his favored instrument. In Isaiah 45, verse 1, the Lord said, "Thus says the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I will uphold to subdue nations before him." Daniel knew this prophecy, and now, in real time, he saw it come to pass. Cyrus, young and ambitious, had emerged from the rugged highlands of Persia. With brilliance and audacity, he conquered the neighboring kingdom of Media, uniting the two thrones into a single unstoppable force, the Medo-Persian Empire. As his influence expanded, so did his confidence. One by one, the powers of the ancient world fell before him. And then he set his sights on the jewel of empires, Babylon. The day foretold in the visions had arrived. But the conquest that followed was no ordinary siege. Inside the palace of Babylon, King Belshazzar, the arrogant and reckless grandson of Nebuchadnezzar, was hosting a grand banquet. 1,000 nobles filled the hall, drunk on wine and pride. Music echoed off the marble walls, golden goblets clinked, and laughter masked the tension simmering beneath the surface. But then Belshazzar crossed a line no king should dare cross. In an act of impious rebellion, he ordered the sacred vessels brought in, those that had long since been removed from the Lord's temple in Jerusalem. These were not mere trophies. They were sacred instruments, once used in the worship of the living God. And now, in the heart of pagan Babylon, they were objects of mockery, offered before false gods of gold, silver, stone, and wood. Can you imagine the silence that followed? The sudden change in atmosphere? At that moment, judgment arrived, not with a clap of thunder, but with the silent movement of an invisible hand. Before the astonished eyes of the king and his nobles, fingers appeared and began to write on the wall. 4 words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin. The music stopped. The wine turned sour. Belshazzar's face paled, his legs buckled. No one in the room understood the meaning of the words. The wisest men in Babylon were helpless, but Daniel was called. He had stood before in the courts of kings. He had interpreted dreams, spoken the truth at the risk of death. And now, once again, he stood boldly to deliver a message that would shake the foundations of an empire. He looked the trembling king in the eye and declared, "God has numbered the days of your reign and has put an end to it. You have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and Persians." Daniel 5 verses 26-28. Even as these words echoed off the stone walls, the prophecy was already in motion. Unseen by the revelers, the armies of Cyrus the Great had executed a brilliant maneuver. Silently, they had diverted the Euphrates River, lowering the water level that once protected Babylon's walls. Under cover of night, the soldiers crept along the dry riverbed and entered the heart of the city. Miraculously, the inner gates had been left unlocked, just as Isaiah had foretold in Isaiah 45:2. "I will go before you and level the mountains. I will break down gates of bronze and cut in pieces the bars of iron." God himself had opened the gates of Babylon. No sword was needed, no siege engine breached the wall. Heaven had already moved the pieces. That same night, King Belshazzar was assassinated. And so, Babylon, the empire that had once seemed invincible, fell without a battle cry. The head of gold, once dreamed of in Daniel's visions, was gone. The silver casket had taken its place. Cyrus, king of Persia, now ruled history. But little did he know that his greatest act was yet to come. For 70 years the people of Israel remained in exile, weeping by the rivers of Babylon. There, harps hung silently in the trees. Their songs of Zion became echoes of memory. It seemed as if the covenant had been crushed beneath the boots of empires. Jerusalem lay in ruins. The temple once filled with God's glory was nothing but ashes and rubble. And then something completely impossible happened. A foreign king, a pagan king, appeared from beyond their borders and did what no one could have expected. Cyrus, ruler of the growing Persian Empire, issued a decree. The Jewish people were able to return home. But Cyrus didn't just free them. He empowered them. He financed the rebuilding of the temple. He restored the dignity of a displaced people. And he didn't do it halfway. He sent them out with royal authority, led by Zerubbabel, a direct descendant of David's royal line, and Joshua, the high priest of Israel. These men, with royal and priestly authority, would lay the foundation for what had been lost. They would begin to restore God's dwelling place on earth. And so, Persia, in an astonishing twist of divine design, became the only empire in history that did not destroy Israel, but rebuilt it. What kind of nation does this? What kind of king finances the house of a foreign god? But as this restoration unfolded, God revealed to Daniel a deeper, darker vision, one that suggested Persia's merciless fate. In a prophetic vision, Daniel saw 4 terrifying beasts rising from the chaotic waters, each more terrifying than the last. The second beast caught his attention, a monstrous bear hulking in shape, rearing on its side with 3 ribs clenched between its bloody teeth. And then a voice from heaven was heard, booming with threatening clarity. "Arise and devour your flesh." What did this mean? The bear represented Media and Persia, and its uneven posture, raised to one side, was no mistake. It reflected the reality that, while Media and Persia would eventually unite as a single empire, Persia would ultimately dominate. The 3 ribs represented its greatest conquests: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. Empires devoured by Persia's insatiable desire for domination. And history confirms this with chilling precision. First, Lydia fell. Its rich cities in Asia Minor could not withstand the Persian tide. Then came Babylon, the golden head of Daniel's earlier statue, humbled in a single night. But Persia did not stop. Like the beast Daniel saw, it kept going. Under the command of Cambyses II, son of Cyrus, Persian forces swept through the Sinai Desert and crushed Pharaoh Psamtik III at the Battle of Pelusium. With the fall of Egypt, the last rib was torn free, but the visions weren't over. Years later, Daniel found himself on the banks of the Ulai River, perhaps reflecting on everything he had seen. And it was there that the heavens opened again. What he saw next was clearer, more detailed, and more terrifying. He saw a wild, proud, and violent ram with 2 large horns. However, one was taller than the other, and this one had grown later. The ram charged west, north, and south, conquering without resistance. Nothing could stand in its way. Then the voice was heard. "The 2-horned ram that you saw represents the kings of Media and Persia." Once again, Persia was at the center of divine prophecy. But this time, not as a benefactor or builder, but as a dominant force. One horn grew taller, and Persia once again eclipsed Media. And the direction of their attack, west, north, and south, reflected their military campaigns. A spiritual portrait of the empire. Unstoppable, unchallenged, or so it seemed. But suddenly the scene changed. From the west came a goat, gliding across the land without touching the ground. So swift was its movement. A single large horn protruded from its forehead, powerful and precise, and in an instant, it attacked the ram, tearing it to pieces and trampling it. The ram, which no one could resist, was demolished in an instant. This wasn't just any conflict. It was the rise of the next empire, Greece under Alexander the Great, which would overthrow Persia with supernatural speed, conquering the known world within 30 years. Daniel may not have known the names, but he understood the message. Persia, for all its glory, for all its divine usefulness, would one day fall. And yet, even with that fall still distant, Persia, at its height, was the center of the world. Its dominion stretched from India to Ethiopia. Its roads were paved with the spoils of conquest. Its laws were immutable. Its palaces were peerless. At the height of its majesty, under the reign of Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes II, the throne of Persia was established in the resplendent city of Susa, the ancient capital of Elam. Today we call this land southwest Iran. It was there, surrounded by marble columns and golden vases, that the greatest empire on earth held court. And it was there, in Susa, that God did the unthinkable. He didn't send an army. He didn't raise up a prophet with thunder and fire. Instead, he raised up a young Jewish woman, orphaned, hidden, and unknown. Esther. She carried no sword. She wore no crown by right. But she had been divinely placed for such a time as this. And with wisdom, beauty, and courage, she would conquer empires and vanquish the greatest threat to her people, not by might, but by faith. The greatest empire in the world would be brought down by the voice of a single woman. Isn't this how God works? By using the powerful to judge and the neglected to deliver. In the days of Persia's greatness, King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes, offered a celebration unprecedented in the empire. For 180 days, half a year, a feast and spectacle unfolded before nobles and princes from all 127 provinces. Gold glittered, wine flowed, and the king's power radiated in every extravagant display. But as the royal festival drew to a close, the king invited all the inhabitants of the capital, Susa, to one last 7-day feast. This time it wasn't just the elite, it was everyone. But amid the euphoria and pride, the king made a momentous decision. Wanting to show off not only his wealth, but also his queen, he summoned Vashti to appear before the guests wearing her royal crown, so that everyone could admire her beauty. But Vashti refused. A single word, a single refusal, and in an instant the empire's pride turned to shame. Humiliated before his guests and his entire court, Ahasuerus reacted with fury. Vashti was banished from the palace and her throne became vacant. What followed was more than a search for a surrogate mother. It was a kingdom-wide beauty contest, organized by the king's advisors. Each province would be scoured for the most beautiful virgins, who would be taken to the royal harem. There, each would undergo a full year of purification and preparation before meeting the king. It was a process as luxurious as it was relentless. Among the chosen ones was a young woman named Hadassah, but no one in the palace knew her true identity. To them, she was simply Esther. Hadassah was an orphan, the daughter of Jewish exiles, raised in secret by her cousin Mordecai. She had lived quietly among her people in Susa, yet now, by God's unseen hand, she had been taken into the very heart of the Persian Empire. Her name was changed, her heritage was hidden, and yet something in her spirit remained unshaken. Esther captivated the king, and although he was unaware of her Jewishness, he placed the crown on her and made her queen of Persia. But as Esther ascended, a shadow loomed over the palace. Haman, a descendant of the Amalekites, Israel's ancient enemies, had risen to a position, second only to that of the king. With cunning and pride, he demanded reverence from all. But when Esther's cousin Mordecai refused to bow, Haman's pride turned poisonous. He wasn't content with punishing a single man. Instead, he devised a plan to eliminate an entire people. He addressed the king in veiled words, describing a scattered people who lived under strange laws and refused to obey royal decrees. Without naming the Jews, he presented them as a threat and offered a bribe to destroy them. The king, trusting his advisor, gave him the royal ring and sealed the edict. On a set date, all we are waiting for you for the continuation. Comment Amen here in the video and subscribe if you would like the second part. It will reveal everything about this biblical story.